So welcome everybody to the Astrology Squad. We're here to give you the astrological inside track on newsmakers, historical figures, and celebrities. And we hope to teach you about the planets and the zodiac signs so you can learn about astrology yourself, your own horoscope, and what it can and cannot offer. My name is Frank Clifford. I'm a full-time astrologer, writer, and teacher. I run the London School of Astrology, which offers courses online and in London. I'm delighted to be here with my co-host, Richard Swatton, and our very special and eminent guest, Rick Levine. Richard, please introduce yourself.
My name is Richard Swatton. I've been a professional astrologer for a long time, since 1988. But I'm also a psychotherapist and studied with Liz Green and House Portus and have the diploma from Psychological Astrology. I've been lecturing since 1988, but in the late 2000s, Frank Clifford took pity on me and brought me into his fold, into the LSA, and I've been enjoying lecturing with students there ever since. I'm trying to finish this eternal book that seems to have a thing that never ends on horary astrology. So I'm interested in a lot of things about astrology, but in terms of natal analysis, it is what the chart can tell us about our own potentials and the fulfillment of the life that we've been given. And so it's a kind of humanistic idea, tinged with a bit of Dane Rudhyar, the idea that the chart shows us what energies and patterns exist within us that it's incumbent upon us to try and fulfill in some way. So that's a general introduction to my approach.
Thanks, Richard. And great to have you, Rick. Thanks so much for being here. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, like Richard, I've been doing astrology since the dawn of time. I got interested in astrology as a teenager and as an undergraduate in college from 67 to 71. That's kind of when I realized this is something I needed to do. I was planning on continuing my education at the Jungian Institute and decided that I wouldn't get enough astrology there at that time. Things may have changed a little bit. But I've been, doing astrology professionally since the mid-late 70s. And I'm as excited about it today as I was when I first discovered it. These days although I do see some clients, I'm terribly backlogged on that. I spend a lot of time doing YouTube work. I do a monthly free YouTube of the astrology of the month ahead, kind of more for the serious student or professional, not so much for the general public. It gets a bit technical, but I do enjoy the teaching aspect of it rather than just saying this is what's happening. I've also written a daily horoscope column for many years. In the heyday of that, I was pushing probably 15 to 20 million readers a day. My daily horoscope was on AOL, MySpace, Google was carrying it, LA Times, the long list. These days I have a scaled back version. Instead of writing for 12 signs, I just write a little kind of my muse of the day. It's called Daily Planet Pulse, and it's on Facebook and Instagram, and it's Rick Levine Astrologer. YouTube channel is Rick Levine Astrologer also. And that's it. I'm here because, astrology is exciting. I love bringing the information to people who either don't know that they know it, or have not looked at it in this particular way. And so I'm always looking for unique ways to convey the same old information. So someone goes, never thought of it like that.
Wonderful. And we're busier than ever, luckily, we can say, because of the world opening up in so many ways online.
Yes.
It's a wonder. I think it's a wonderful time to be continuing to learn astrology, however many years we've been doing it. So in this video, we're looking at the birth chart of the Queen of Soul herself, Aretha Franklin, one of the great iconic interpreters of song, be it gospel, soul, pop, whose music in the 1960s originally was the soundtrack to the emerging civil rights movement. When she died in 2018, she'd become one of the most awarded singers of her generation, in fact, of the last 100 years, with 18 Grammys, 3 special Grammys, and 44 nominations in total. So we're going to start by looking at the Sun, Moon, Ascendant, any other key facets of the chart. Rick Levine, anywhere you want to particularly start?
Well, yeah, as I look at her chart, although I see a Sun in Aries, her Sun in Aries is almost, I don't want to say this, but I'm going to. It's almost not as important as her Moon in Cancer, because her Moon in Cancer is trine, is harmonized with her ascendant. She has a Scorpio ascendant and a Moon in Cancer, and this is soul. This is water. This is feeling. This is emotion. Now, the Aries Sun may pack a wallop and give that, that push of that energy, forward. But the Moon in Cancer is soaking in emotion, soaking in feeling, holding that, going deep. And the Scorpio energy gives it perspective and even more power. I'm always intrigued by a chart that has Aries and Scorpio energy, because it's only us moderners that give Pluto as the ruling planet to Scorpio. Yeah. For a couple of thousand years, we were very happy saying that Mars is the ruler of both Aries and Scorpio, and therefore we would certainly want to look at her Mars. I'll save that for a little bit, but that's going to be a key piece of her picture.
Yeah. Thank you, Rick. Richard, anything you want to add?
Well, why don't you give us some of your insight, Frank, in this, and I'll listen to you for a little while.
Yes. I think she's a Sun in Aries in the 5th house. I don't think all 5th house people are natural performers, but certainly there's a need to create and to keep creating. And she was a mother from the age of 12. Had four sons. The Sun-Neptune opposition is something I find interesting, even though it's dissociate, it's out of sign. And in a way, Sun-Neptune people, particularly if they're performers or writers, educators, they have a way of really transcending, great Neptune word, transcending any sort of category. And so people like Aretha, and you could look at other entertainers with Sun-Neptune, like Diana Ross, another.
I have a Sun-Neptune opposition.
You're Sun-Neptune. And that ability to really speak to what's at the heart of everybody, or in Aretha's case, to sing. We see Neptune very strong in the charts of people who are what you might call crossover artists, people who are, doesn't matter what they sing, they speak to something in the human spirit, or they speak to that which we all connect with. And so I think that's part of it. The scandal rags, the biographies on Aretha will tell us about the Sun-Neptune idolization of her father, who was a preacher, a minister, very powerful, very respected man with a very private life going on as well, but also the tumultuous relationships that she had in that way. But I think the power of that Sun-Neptune, when she claimed it, or reclaimed it, was very much an ability to move people. And it's got that similar feeling, as Rick was saying, about the Moon in Cancer, the Scorpio ascendant, that ability to make people feel. And the opposition has that ability to move people beyond, or take them somewhere else, away from the mundane. So that's one of the key features that I would look at with that Sun in Aries. She was also notoriously competitive with people, and always getting into some sort of feud or war of words. She was sending off faxes to people, threatening legal action, trying to disrupt things. And I have a feeling she was probably a little bit bored sometimes with that, and a bit mischievous. And that Aries is competitive. Don't anyone come for my Queen of Soul title. And I think people are naturally competitive towards Aries, and Aries is naturally competitive towards everybody. on some level, I guess. So what you see that sort of marred the reputation over the years, apart from the brilliant performances, was this ability to be a sort of war with people. And this maybe is where we come to with the Mars Jupiter, that ability to keep prodding, antagonizing, arguing, creating feuds, I think she felt alive when she was fighting. And that probably very Aries Scorpio type of energy. Richard, anything you want to add to that?
When you look at the archetypal qualities of Aries, devoid of the personal characterization of it, so there's, in astrology, there's always those two things, isn't it? We've got the energies of the signs, and then it's how it's used in a personal form, which is very connected to culture and so on. And you can read that from a chart, of course, but that Neptune is a mediumistic quality, very well known in the artists, is that when she's doing her sun sign in the fifth house, when she is creating, when she is performing, when she's on stage, all of those associations with the fifth house that we know so well, she's actually channeling something. And I, by the way, Rick, have a Sun, Neptune, Mercury, Neptune too. And you probably know that when we're in a kind of dialogue, when we're kind of riffing around an astrological placement, things come out that we didn't expect. It's like sometimes when you're in the vicinity of a client, there is a psychic empathy, not just an empathy of emotion, but a psychic empathy that can sometimes have an intuitional statement or something, or a vision, or I get metaphors or an image or something, as well as the words. And I think Neptune does that. It's the planet of making things porous to other levels of reality. And of course, Neptune in the 11th, she's a goddess to everybody. She's an icon. And I do think that she was truly religiously motivated. I think she was a true Christian, brought up by her father as a Baptist minister, who of course had his affairs. They split, he split up with his mother and so on. Perhaps the father exploited her a bit, because there's a lot of money to be made in ministries, as we know from the United States. But nevertheless, I think she was true to what you might call soul. And soul has three aspects, in the Ficinian sense. The one is to the animalistic soul emotion that can get you in touch with your own sorrow, which gets you in touch with the depth of your own emotional. So it's like the soul is partly animal, it's partly instinctual and emotional. And then it's rational in the sense that one can understand things at a greater level. It has a communication, if you like, of a higher order. And then there's the spiritual aspect of the soul, which is trying to get back to the source of things. So when she's Queen of Soul, oh, by the way, sorry, Frank, I hope I'm not going to embarrass you, but I thought this was absolutely wonderful. Leo on the midheaven from Frank's the midheaven spotlight. With Leo on the MC, we should aim to cultivate a dignified, even regal bearing that commands respect and attention. And of course, one of her great songs was Respect, all of that. And so the Queen, the regality, I think she really portrayed her chart well. And that, as Rick said about this moon in Cancer, there's a deep sense that she can contact people personally with the emotion of her voice. But I think it was religiously inspired. I think she had a contact somehow. So when she sung, that watery, mediumistic, emotional quality flowed through. So I agree with you, Rick. There's more Cancer, water, dark emotion of the soul. But the fuel is provided by this Aries need to release life energy. This is what Dame Roger said about the sign of Aries, that the importance is the release of something, the penetration of something, and then it and then it vitalizes life, whether it's aggressive, whether it's in the form of a querulous individual or creating arguments, or whether it's sexual, or whether it's the release of a kind of great deal of vitality. That's the heart, I think, of the Aries need to be potent and to be effective in life. If it's not creating some kind of movement in someone, it's failing. But she did. Anyway, that's the beginnings of what I want to say about this wonderful chart.
We talked a bit, and I brought it up, and then you took it a step further. The moon in Cancer and the fact that it's trine Scorpio, but somehow we never completed the circle, and that is that moon in mid-water, trine Scorpio, ascendant mid-water, is also part of a grand trine or grand triangle, harmonized or trine to the south node of the moon, which is conjunct Mercury. Now you look at that south node of the moon conjunct Mercury, the moon's nodes are often related to whether you call it past life or past in this life. There's a genetic, some sort of historic component. And the fact that singing was part of her family tradition, not just the religion. Again, her Cancer moon is that she is part of a network of feeling part of this matrix, part of this, which is a great lunar word because it's a word that means mother, actually. Mater. And that her connection to that through that Cancer moon, and when she opened her mouth and sang, that Piscean sense of the spiritual, of the compassionate, of the RESPECT, she would never ever sing a song that, in that whole genre, there are a lot of songs that are about people whose lives were down and out, whose people who were done wrong. She would never sing a song about a woman who was, was kind of in the negative aspect of womanhood rather than something uplifting. It was something she stuck to, through her whole life. But one other thing I want to mention is that I think in her chart, we see a little bit of what a psychologist would call reaction formation, what many people would call overcompensation. And that is that not only the Cancer moon, but also Chiron conjunct Pluto. Granted, now these are slower moving planets, so there is a bit of a generational aspect to it. But that Chiron Pluto conjunction is trine the sun. And so there's a personalization of this wound in some way that turned her into a great teacher and mentor. And I can't help but kind of just see the irony, because I know many people are watching this on YouTube, but we just recorded a session about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And Aretha Franklin is such a classic case of someone who had the early wounds and the difficulty, deep wounds, probably severe abuse in her first marriage. I mean, motherhood, as a young teenager, preteen even, and how she with grandeur overcame that. This is a form of a hero's journey, facing the shadow and coming out of it. And we look at that seventh house and we see how and why. We see that Mars conjunct Jupiter, that enthusiasm that's going to overamp. And it's almost like a Mars Jupiter conjunction doesn't have a shadow. I mean, I know it does, but it's like it's like it can be so powerful and forceful in its uplifting sense that it stands on its own. And then the Saturn Uranus conjunction, which is actually trining Neptune Uranus more closely. But that Saturn Uranus is an interesting dance, because Rob Hand once said that Saturn and Uranus together is like an irrepressible force, that would be Uranus, meeting an immovable object, that would be Saturn. And we see that in her outer life, in contract negotiations, and in that she had that kind of I hate authority, I am authority, that iconoclast that I think really comes across, and it's part of her spirituality. It's tied to that Neptune. So those are just a few more thoughts.
We could talk about the Venus square to that Saturn the sense that she's not good enough, that she's not attractive enough, that, under the dominance of the father to a certain extent, that very powerful Saturn in Taurus, the throat and everything else. But then the Venus-Uranus, the I don't care, the overthrow of the old order. It's a conflict in her. I wonder whether she had a conflict between breaking new ground, within her civil rights and Martin Luther King and all that, and just keeping a lid on it. Yeah. I think there was probably a deep tension between that, whether she should be promoting that. Do you see what I mean? Promoting revolution or just keeping a lid on it.
I think that's said in another way in her chart too, Richard. I think you're exactly right. Yeah. But the fact that Mercury South Node conjunction is square to the Mars Jupiter, Mars Jupiter being at the nodal bending in effect, the halfway point. And so there's something there about that Mars Jupiter that I might have said Mars Neptune. Something about that Mars Jupiter having to carry extra weight during this lifetime, having to overcome something. And in some ways, what she's overcoming is the natural tendency to just sing about pain like everyone else in her family.
Yeah, but I wish we'd had time to really go into the detail of that Pluto Chiron, that she is voicing, in fact, something to do with her race. She's voicing that unconscious element, which is the unspoken elephant always in the room when somebody has to use a right hotel, or she can't, no matter how regal she is, certain other singers. And so, Ray Charles and all of that, and they have to kind of fit into the social mold, and we can see through their artistry, they're way above. They're way above. They are so contributing to society's not only art, but a kind of release. I think all performers in some way, what is the stage about? What is the fifth house about? It provides a drama through which viewers and fans and those accompany the theatre to call forth from themselves a kind of catharsis. That's what the whole theatre is about, is to identify something. And I think she did it very Pisces, Mercury in Pisces. I've just finished this. Through her singing and her emotion, she was able to call forth, unarticulated to a certain extent, not intellectually, but through her very mode of operating her communication, she was able to tap into a lot of emotional release from people. She knew, rather like some of the old soul singers from jazz, she knew how to release the deep pain in people.
And I think that she wasn't afraid of making other people as uncomfortable as she was, even when she looked comfortable. Yeah. And I'm looking at her sun so tightly, semi-square, half of a square to Venus. Yeah. Venus can never get very far away from the sun. And yet when it's 45 degrees away from the sun, it's almost like a square to the sun. But there's tension between that part of her that wants to love everybody, the Venus and Aquarius. Exactly. I love humanity. It's just the individual humans I can't stand, and that square to the sun, wanting to be enthusiastic and sing about uplifting things. And I think that sometimes she was at odds with herself that made other people uncomfortable, even though she looked like she was comfortable doing what she was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both for that. Yes. The other thing as well, of course, that she's extremely private. And you imagine that with the moon.
Cancer moon, Scorpio rising.
And Scorpio rising, yes. So the idea of being a public person, all of a sudden, the voice of a generation, people elevating her obviously appreciating being elevated too, and enjoying what came with that. But the intrusion must have been unbearable at times. And it's a fascinating thing being a public performer, but a very, very private person, which I think the chart indicates in that split between that fifth house, but then all the water, and she preferred to be at home, not flying, at home watching soaps, thinking of ideas of what to do, and not journeying out really.
But she had a phobia of flying. That she had a panic attack on one occasion, or a problematic flight, and so therefore, even though she's got that Jupiter need to communicate and that Mars in Jupiter, I think that there was some trouble with that if she was going to appear somewhere, that she would have to go by road, and so therefore didn't do that so much.
There was a lot that
I remember, you guys may know, people watching may not, there is an astrologer named Donna Cunningham who passed away a few years ago.
Yes.
And Donna was a Cancer sun with an Aries moon.
Right.
And Donna would say, here I am getting off the airplane in some little town in the mountains of Peru.
Mm-hmm.
And my Cancer sun would say to my Aries moon, why do you always do this to me?
Mm.
And in a way, I see that in her chart, not just with the sun. I mean, like her, I have a sun in Aries and a Cancer moon. Mine are exactly square. I know that drill. But with that half square to Venus, again, I don't think she was always comfortable being the Aries that she was famous for being.
I agree. You have a basic fundamental problem with being at peace. I think being at peace is very moon-like. What is comfortable? Where do I belong? Am I okay with my environment and my family? It's a kind of security issue with one's emotional fluctuations. And the moon in Cancer is terribly weather-bound. They never know from day to day what the emotions are going to do, and then somebody upsets them or they're rejected or something, and they have to put up with that kind of continual in and out of the sea, and so the general tendency is to keep things the same, keep things familiar, not have too much upset. But that Aries, the sun in Aries can't have that. He needs to get things moving, needs to provoke, needs to pioneer, needs to prod.
Write letters and sue people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you may tell us about more of that in another interview, Rick. But that fundamental.
No, I didn't mean that I did. I meant that she did.
Well, yeah. Well, okay. Well, that's what I said. But this fundamental dichotomy between keeping things calm, at peace, loving, well-fed, not having to go out, not having to prove, and this sun in Aries needing to be effective and keep things going. It's a fundamental difficulty, that square between the sun and the moon. And life unfolds on that contradiction of needs. One is to feel safe and wanted and secure, and the other wants to upset the apple cart. How you live that? Well, look at the life of Aretha Franklin.
And the life of Rick Levine, perhaps, as well.
And perhaps, yes, maybe we'll do one on Rick another time. That would be interesting.
I think that's...
No, I pass.
Okay, Rick.
I have a Cancer moon, remember?
Yeah,
I'm okay being on stage as long as I'm making up my stuff. I don't want people to look at it.
Well, the need for privacy in Aretha's chart, I think, as we said, is, I think, paramount. But it's... if you're an astrologer and you're willing to go in, and if you read, I've been reading a book, the David Ritz book. He wrote a book with her where she wrote her life story with him in the way that she imagined. And then he came back and said, I really want to write the truth. He didn't say it as bluntly as that, but he decided to write it, and she condemned it a few years before she died. And there's a quote in here that says, it remains, her book is an accurate view of her picture of herself, but students of culture and psychology who want to understand this defiantly inscrutable woman cannot afford to ignore her own carefully self-styled testimony. And so this is a reinvention of the past, doing something like Rick does, like we all do in astrology. You find outlets, you find ways of using your chart in ways that perhaps other people really don't get the chance to do, or we're forced at least to explore and to go within as well. Would you say, Rick?
Isn't that the life sometimes, the life a current, the life thing, whenever you have the sun, in connection, a strong connection to Neptune, and you have that, Rick, and I have that. And that's the sun is about the individualization of the life force. That's what it is. That's what the dot in the center of the circle means. The circle is eternity, the eternity of the life continuing and continuing. But the sun, the dot is the individual that has to give form to that life force. And so, it's individuation, finding your own life, finding your own specialness, the hero's journey, all of that we've covered. And that's behind the sun. But Neptune is a desire not to indulge that too much. It's a desire to get back to the source, whether that's through drugs, drink, religion, mystical illumination, surrender to something higher than yourself, a monk's life, or perhaps an artist, channeling.
I'll take half of those.
Yeah, but do you see what I mean? Isn't that the contradiction of sun and an outer planet such as Neptune? One wants dissolution of the individual self, and one wants to incarnate the individual self and make one's, it's an eternal kind of struggle between the archetypal, seeing oneself as a relation to the whole, and also the individual component of that. It's a constant struggle, whether it's a trine or sextile or opposition or conjunction. I think you're exactly. Yeah.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, Neptune's job is to dissolve that which we think is real, and the sun's job, it's even Aries coming after Pisces. Pisces is total dissolution. You're in the, in the cosmic swamp, cesspool. And from that comes, the birth of everything new. And so the sun wants to discriminate isn't quite the right word, wants to separate out a self from the cosmic sea.
From the
meanwhile, Neptune's job is to melt the self back into the cosmic sea. I'm sorry, Richard, I cut you off.
No, you didn't. I think we're describing the same thing. And isn't that whenever you have that Sun Neptune in a chart, the giving voice to either side, either god, that the sun, Apollo, wants to be brilliant, to shine and to be creative and artistic or whatever it is, and rational and important. And then the Neptune says, it's not worth it. Give in, give into life, flow, the Alan Watts thing, flow with life rather than demand from it. And that creative, there's a creative element between the individual and the suppression of the individual with Neptune. It's a life theme, I think. Don't you think, Rick?
I do. I want to say also that, when Frank introduced that opposition, he used the word disassociative, or because they're not in the same modality. A true opposition to an Aries sun would be in Libra. My experience is different than what the textbooks teach. I think that when you have, this is a 6-degree orb, opposition, almost 7 degrees. And for the sun, most people would say that's an acceptable orb. That works. The fact that they are out of modality, that they're not in their normal sign, positions, I don't think weakens it. I think in a funny way, it strengthens it. And I don't mean that it makes it easier to express. I think it's harder to express, which makes it stand out more. It's kind of a homeopathic view that when things are harder to express, the energy gets bottled. And I've seen this over and over again with aspects that are either out of element. I was going to say out of elephant. Oh, by the way, when you said the elephant in the center of the room before, Richard, I was thinking that a couple of weeks ago, I came up with this idea that because we're just through in a lot of this month, I say this month, April of 2022, a lot of this month is about the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces. And so I decided that was the psychedelephant in the middle of the room. because it was a psychedelic elephant, because it was Neptune in Pisces with Jupiter there. But still, it was like that thing that was so big that people were talking about it. Isn't this wonderful? And blah, 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 blah. But no one was really talking about its shadow.
Yes. Well, I think Frank's idea of a dissociative opposition, I mean, that's a complication in astrology. It's still an opposition, but it's more complex when the opposite sign isn't realized. It is a bit, but that's a more complex discussion, I think.
It is.
Yeah, but still the opposition here works. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
That there are people who would dismiss it and say, nope, it's, it's not as important. And I don't see that at all, especially from what we know about her and from what we've seen in the
I agree. It's just as important. It's within orb, and Mercury is, in mutual reception with that as well.
Yeah, also it's, when signs are opposite, if they're in the same element, like Aries and Libra, same modality, excuse me.
Yeah.
Then it's two sides of the same coin. They have a lot in common that they're dealing with. When you're dealing with a out of sign opposition, you're dealing with a quincunx, and
harder to integrate.
Quincunx by sign.
Yes, and
it's more difficult to integrate. Yes,
absolutely right.
When I look at Aries and Virgo, being in Aries with the moon in Virgo, I think of work being the savior. That could be Neptune in Virgo as an image. It could be the redeeming factor. But certainly there's a need to engage in meaningful work, I imagine, with the Sun Neptune. But with those two signs involved as well, you've got the idea of the workaholic as well, or somebody finding meaning in the process of generating and regenerating work as well. Let's bring it to a close. Thank you so much, both of you. Really appreciate your energy and your expertise. Thank you. Thanks to my co-host Richard Swatton and to our very special guest Rick Levine. You can find us on astrologysquad.com and on YouTube. Please subscribe to be notified of other videos. And thank you both for being here. And thanks for watching.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
It was a great pleasure. It's just wonderful to engage in astrological dialogue.
It is. Thank you both so much. See you soon. Thank you.